Well, I figured that if I was going to make a Persona video that I would just have to put on the most appropriate attire, so here we are. People often ask me, Miles, do you have tabs for any of these Persona covers that you've done? And my response is generally the same as everyone who came before them, which is, please get out of my house. Although I don't have the tabs for any song I covered because I learned them all by ear, allow me to impart some different, albeit tangentially related knowledge in regards to Persona music. That is, the guitar sounds of Persona music and how to easily achieve them. I'll be discussing the soundtracks of Personas 3, 4, and 5 simply because they're what I've played, but a lot of this can easily apply to other games in the series, including the SMT mainline games, because they all feature the same composer, Mr. Shoji Meguro. Before we dive into it, be sure to smash that subscribe button. I'm talking absolutely destroy that thing. Completely eviscerate that motherfucker. Before I get into the tones and the sounds themselves, it's important to understand the gear being used to create the music. Generally, there are two main guitar parts playing in the soundtracks, a rhythm and a lead. The rhythm guitar is usually playing chords with single coil pickups and a cream-colored Fender Stratocaster. And I know you're wondering why I know that specific detail. Well... So yeah, a lot of my knowledge on this topic is based on what they use to play the music in the Persona Live concerts, and I'll be referring to these concerts throughout the video. The gear isn't exactly the same between every concert, but I'll try to point out the differences when applicable. Let's start with the rhythm guitar. Admittedly, I'm using the terms both rhythm and lead a bit loosely, seeing as both players sometimes play both rhythm and lead parts depending on the context, but I'm just going to categorize it in this way to make it easier to explain things. Fun fact if you didn't know, the composer Meguro-san himself actually plays rhythm guitar. He's always seen playing this very distinctive cream-colored Fender Stratocaster. His go-to amp from what I can tell is a Marshall JCM2000 Triple Super Lead 100 seen at most of the shows, but I've also seen him play a Fender Hot Rod Deluxe back in 2008 and a Roland Jazz Chorus 120 in 2009, and then in 2017 there was a pair of Marshall heads, but neither of them look like the Triple Super Lead. I think one of them was a JCM 900. And one of them was on the ground, I assume as a backup. Also seen on stage in 2013 was this Avid 11 rack. Look, I know that's a lot to digest, so let's just break it down one amp at a time, starting with the Marshall Triple Super Lead. The Marshall has 3 separate channels, which would make sense seeing as its name is the Triple Super Lead. One channel for clean, one for crunch, and another that's just a straight up lead. I'm gonna go out on a limb here, but I'm gonna guess that he has at least 2 separate channels set, the clean one for cleans and either the crunch or the lead for a dirt tone. He might in fact have the lead channel set up for solos, as he does break away from the usual rhythm parts to play a solo here and there, making full use of this 3-channel setup. Moving on to the Roland Jazz Chorus. If you're familiar with this amp in any capacity, you'll know that this amp has no crunch or dirt settings. Some newer models have a distortion circuit that makes the tone sound compressed at best. It is very much a purely clean amplifier. I'm gonna go out on another limb here and say that he probably has a few pedals to achieve his dirt tones and other effects when he performed with this amp. As for the Fender Hot Rod Deluxe, I'm gonna be honest with you, I just found out he used this amp after writing like 98% of the script, so I'm just gonna ignore it and pretend like I didn't see it. This video goes in depth enough on how to achieve the sounds that it's not really necessary to go over it anyways. Therefore, I'll move on to the last big piece of gear as seen in the 2013 performance, the Avid 11 rack. I'm gonna be completely honest with you, I have no idea what he uses for. If I had to guess, I'd say maybe he used it for some guitar processing or effects that could easily be controlled with the foot switch as needed, maybe like a chorus or a delay. In my opinion, I would prefer a pedal for either of those, but I can see how this might be better in terms of a controlled environment on stage. Moving on to the other player in the band, we'll call him the lead guy. I have no idea what his name is, and I think there are a few different guys that fill in for this part. I've seen the lead players with a mix of guitars ranging from a Fender Jaguar to a Telecaster to a Strat to a Gibson Les Paul to a PRS whatever, and even a Flying V for some reason. God, I hate how these things look. The amp generally looks like a Mesa Boogie dual rectifier equipped with 3 channels, and thus I assumed it's used in a similar way that Meguro-san's Marshall is, with a clean channel for the cleans and also a dirt and a lead tone. A Fender Supersonic was also used in 2017, but who cares? As an aside, at least in all the pre-Persona 5 concerts that I've seen, he also uses an electric acoustic guitar on stage that generally sits on a stand, but more on this later. Now I know that's a lot to take in, and I know what you're thinking, Miles, well that's great, but I'm poor and I can't afford any of this equipment. To which I say, same. But I think the most important takeaway of all is not to go out and buy $1,000 worth of gear just to try to recreate this sound, but rather understanding what gear is being used to be able to try and recreate those sounds with what you have. Because believe it or not, you would be surprised how accurately you can actually recreate these tones with just minimal gear. With that being said, let's move on to the different tones of the soundtracks and how to achieve them. Let's start off with the basics, the clean sound. In the soundtracks, clean guitar is heavily used for accompaniment, times where the guitar player plays a supporting role in the music as a whole, similar to its role in a jazz ensemble. You can hear it in tracks like Signs of Love from Persona 4 and Wanna Be Close from Persona 3. Of course, there are moments where the guitar is in fact the main focus of the music. Using clean, modulated guitar to dynamically contrast with an explosive, overdriven chorus is fairly common, especially in the Persona 3 and 4 soundtracks. This motif is used to great effect in the opening track of Persona 3, Burn My Dread. The song begins with the clean guitar with a dash of delay. In the live performances, you can see Meguro
Moto with his trusty Strat and the neck pickup selected for this part. It took a lot of effort to pause the video at just the right moment, but you can barely see the tip of his pickup selector switch in the bottom of the shot. Here it is roughly 20 seconds before. He's definitely using the clean channel in the Marshall, or the Hot Rod Deluxe in the Performance back in 2008, or the Jazz Chorus in the Performance in 2009.
Look, it's a clean sound, it's not rocket science. Again, for delay and pedals, I'm not really sure what he's using most of the time, but I was able to freeze the video here in the 2017 Performance and spotted this really weird looking red pedal. After some research, I concluded it was most likely this Atomic Amps amplifier multi-effects unit, purely judging from the layout of the knobs. In these performances, it seems like he's next to the board when the modulation is being used, so I can only assume that's what he used. Now let's try to recreate that tone. I'm plugged into my Boss RE20 Space Echo here, which is a digital recreation of a tape delay. The type of delay doesn't really matter, and in fact, I think a digital delay would even sound better because I think it sounds a lot more brighter and glassier compared to this pedal, which is a bit darker. To compensate, I've turned the treble up and the bass all the way down for the reverb. It's not really a perfect fix, if even a fix at all, but the delay trail will be a bit brighter. The amp I'm using today, of course, is my trusty Vox AC15, but you can play through whatever you have. It doesn't really matter what you have as long as the tone is clear and not really too muddy. Of course, we'll be using the neck pickup because it makes chords sound a bit more springy. Acoustic guitar is hardly used in the Persona soundtracks, but I think it's worth a brief mention. After the intro of Burn My Dread, the song shifts into the verses with light acoustic guitar combined with electric guitar. In live performances, Meguro-san will play the clean, while the lead guitar player will use the acoustic electric. I spent a considerable amount of time trying to figure out the exact model of guitar, but it looks like there's a few different ones depending on the performance. You always see it on the stand sitting in a playing position. The nice thing about it being on a stand is once he's done, he can immediately switch to the electric, which he does do in the explosive chorus in Burn My Dread. The guitar is also featured in performances of the credit song of Persona 3, Memories of You. Overdrive is a bit of a broad term, so I'm going to break it down into two different categories, light and heavy. Light overdrive is heard intermittently throughout the soundtracks, but most notably begins to play a role in the Persona 5 soundtrack where the guitar is playing the main melody or it accompanies another instrument playing the main melody. Tracks like Wake Up, Get Up, Get Out There, Life Will Change, Tokyo Daylight, Tokyo Emergency, Butterfly Kiss, Layer Cake, My Homie, When Mother Was There, I mean the list goes on. They all feature light overdriven guitar with a single coil in the neck. In the live performances of the Persona 5 stuff, both guitar players are using Fender Stratocasters, which just makes sense because that sound is so distinct and specific to the Fender Stratocaster. Let's try to recreate that sound in a few different ways. So I picked two pedals that are fairly varied in order to try to recreate this sound with what I have, and also a third secret option that I'll explain in a bit. Starting off with the full tone OCD, this pedal is probably traditionally what you would use to try to achieve this effect. The pedal has a switch that goes between a high gain setting and a low gain setting, so I picked the low gain setting for this song. The volume and the overdrive are about 10 o'clock right now, and the tone is up considerably, about 2, just to give it a bit brighter sound. Moving on, we're going to try to make it work with one of the most common dirt pedals, the Boss DS1. This pedal can be a bit tricky to dial in properly. Many players complain about how bad it sounds, but the trick is you have to be smart with the controls. I kept the tone under 9 o'clock and the distortion about 10. I'm not sure if my pedal in particular is broken, but I always feel like I have to turn the volume up a lot, which is what I did here. Lastly, say maybe you don't have any kind of dirt pedal. All is not lost. Let's try to do the same thing with no pedals, just the amp's natural gain. Once again, I'm plugged into my Vox AC15 for this. Let's see what we can do. Each has its own advantages, but I think pedals are great if your amp is set to clean, or you have a purely clean amp like our Jazz Chorus that Meguro-san used back in 2009. If you're able to pick between pedals and amp overdrive sounds, I think it's really just a matter of taste and what works best for your setup. If I'm recording, I might try to get a really good amp overdrive sound, but for ease of use and in a live setting, I'd probably pick a pedal. Obviously, I am biased in that regard because I have 4 gain pedals on my board, but we all pick our battles. Heavy overdrive is the sound that can best describe the heavy-hitting rock numbers often heard during boss fights and battles throughout the games. Unavoidable Battle, Reach Out to the Truth, Willpower, The Battle for Everyone's Souls, I'll Face Myself, Blooming Villain, and so forth. It's often associated with loud, upfront chord progressions and monster riffs. The tone for these tracks is pretty straightforward. Oftentimes, all you need is any sort of overdrive or distortion, pushing a sizable amount of volume. In the live performances, I would assume that the players are using the dirt channels in both the Marshall and the Mesa Boogie amps. It could be done with pedals, but I think that the sound of those amplifiers cranked would make for a pretty phenomenal sound. So let's play some. the track I just played, Blooming Villain, I used my Marshall Shredmaster clone. It's just perfect for recreating those heavy Marshall type sounds that Meguro-san uses. Personally, I recommend distortion for this tone, but if you have an overdrive pedal with a lot of gain on tap like the OCD, you could use that as well. As far as what pickups to use, when it comes to these lead parts, the bridge pickups are a must. Meguro-san always uses his Strat with single coils, and the lead guy uses single coils or humbuckers depending on the guitar he's using. Personally, I think single coils sound really good for this sound in the soundtrack, which is what I use for sounds that I just played. However, let's try double tracking some humbucker sounds to mimic the chorus and burn my dread. As a quick aside, there's not really much effects used in conjunction with these heavier sounds. I know the lead guy uses a wah for the Persona 4 Arena melody during the concert in 2013, but then Meguro-san has a wah in 2017 for Tokyo Emergency, and I know Master of Tartarus features a wah. Probably my favorite use of this effect was featured in the Reincarnation remix version of Unavoidable Battle, which the lead player uses on some of those lead lines. It's certainly a flavor effect, and it's totally not necessary, but I think when used right, like in this instance, it sounds perfect. There's not really much difference when it comes to the heavy overdrive and lead tone when it comes to Persona music. I would say the main thing is to have the volume slightly more boosted for solos so it cuts through the mix. Oftentimes in the Persona soundtracks, the lead or solo tone and the heavy overdrive tone are used at the same time on separate guitars playing different parts to fill out the sound, with lead being a really smooth, sometimes creamy sound and the overdrive having a harsher and more distorted sonic quality. An example of this would be in the track I'll Face Myself. With all that out of the way, there is one specific special solo sound that makes an appearance in the Persona 5 soundtrack, and that can be heard on tracks like Keeper of Lust and Willpower. That sound is the unmistakable sound of a Big Muff fuzz pedal. If you watched that last video on my pedal board, you'll probably remember me mentioning that I don't have a Big Muff anymore. But I sold my last one fairly recently, so I can't really showcase that sound. Or can I? As mentioned in my pedalboard video, I found a way to recreate a decent Big Muff sound by stacking two distortion pedals on top of each other. It's not perfect, but it certainly gets within the arena of tonal possibility. As I said before, you don't need the correct gear to recreate some of these sounds, you just need to figure out the best way to use what you have, because in the end, it doesn't even matter what gear you have. Thank you so much for watching. Did you know that I have original music you are very welcome to check out on every streaming service under the sun? If you didn't, it's one great way to support what I do, as well as donating to my Ko-Fi, leaving a thanks in the comments, and the usual like, comment, subscribe stuff. If you're still aching for more content, you're welcome to follow me on my Instagram and TikTok, as well as check out some of my other videos on here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.